Hello, my name is Mohammed Mahmoud. I'm the director of the Middle East Institute's Climate and Water Program, and welcome to MEI's Road to COP27 virtual conference event. Just a quick housekeeping note before we start. If you've seen the latest event schedule for today, you may have noticed a change with respect to our original agenda. Unfortunately, due to last-minute time conflicts and cancellations with our other speakers, both our keynote presentation and our panel on climate justice and the climate crisis have been postponed to a yet-to-be determined date. We'll have more information on those forthcoming soon. However, 1 hour after this panel concludes, we will still commence with our second panel of the day at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, where the discussion theme will be on pathways and obstacles to climate financing. But our current and first panel of the day will focus on climate adaptation for water resources management. And we have an excellent panel of experts today to help us explore this topic. With us, we have Dr. John Matthews, Executive Director of the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, or AGWA. Some of John's notable achievements include the development of climate risk reduction methodologies that have been used in dozens of countries, also preparing green bond criteria that have been certified more than 15 billion US dollars in water resilience investments across 6 continents, and advising well over 100 countries on their national climate commitments. Also with us is Dr. Raha Hakim Davar, the Director of Space Sciences at Ball Aerospace. Raha works at the intersection of science, policy, and engineering to support space tech development for a more sustainable, equitable, and inspired future on Earth and in space. Raha previously served as a Presidential Management Fellow at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center and as an environmental consultant for the UN Environment and the World Bank in the Caribbean and Latin America. Unfortunately, Dr. Hassan Abdunaga, who wanted to be with us today, could not join us due to an illness. But we will hopefully be able to address some of the areas that he wanted to share with us today. And then finally, before we start discussion, for our audience who are attending live, if you'd like to submit questions, please feel free to do so via the Q&A function in Zoom, and I will try to incorporate those questions during our panel discussion. All right, with all that out of the way, let's dive into our discussion, and maybe I'll ask an initial question to sort of set off our topic and kind of give us some context. So first question I'll ask is, what do you see, and this is to both our panelists, what do you see as the main challenges to water resources management in the Middle East and North Africa specifically? And maybe Raha, I'll start with you, and then John, you can pick it up after.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much. It is really a pleasure to be here with you, and what an important topic to be discussing. So I might just start by kind of setting the stage a little bit with kind of where we are in the region. So almost 1.8 billion people in 17 countries, and that's a quarter of the world's population, appear to be veering towards a water crisis. And 17 of these countries, 12 are in the Middle East and North Africa. So clearly it's a region that has seen a lot of water challenges because of its geographic location over the years. But today we find that more than 60% of the region's population is concentrated in the places that are affected by the high or very high water stress, particularly with surface water stress, compared to a global average that is about 35%. And what this can translate into is direct economic impact or losses. And the World Bank has estimated that climate-related water scarcity is expected to cause economic losses estimated between 6 to 14% of GDP by 2050. So this is the highest in the world. And then one other thing to add is that these water shortage is can be and is a catalyst for other things. So a result that can come from water shortage is water stress, is food insecurity, migration, forced migration, along with growing frustrations with governments that are unable to guarantee basic services to their citizens. And this comes with the risk of becoming another driver of the region's potential widespread instability. So really what I think that the challenge is that we are in a cycle, and that the water scarcity challenges that have grown to be much worse of recent years due to number of things like population growth, climate change, water management challenges, and global affairs and regional affairs. That can lead to these other things that then within that cycle, food insecurity challenges and stresses our water resources even further. Forced migration can also cause further challenges, and instability within countries and regionally can also further exacerbate and challenge our water resources and our ability to manage them properly. So not getting into specific breakdown of per sector, which hopefully we get a chance to do today, that's kind of where we are. That's kind of painting the picture of, we in the region, there are a lot of challenges that are being brought on by water security that are in a cyclical way, making water more scarce and more challenged in the region.
That's a great way to set the stage. John, I'll ask you the same question, and maybe there are areas you want to maybe stress, underline that Raha mentioned, or others just based on your experience that you feel should be maybe top of the list or should get greater focus in terms of the water management challenges in the region.
Sure, and I think it's also important to compare the Middle East with other parts of the world, like what are maybe some of the kind of special issues that are in the region. And I'd like to actually start by contrasting maybe missed opportunity. This is COP27, of course, is in Egypt, and COP28 is going to be in UAE, which is fantastic. It's two really strong Middle Eastern COPs and kind of highlighting regional issues. But this is not the first Middle Eastern COP. The COP22 was Marrakesh. It was in the kind of modern era of climate change action and policy. The Paris Agreement is really probably the primary divide. That's 2015. And Marrakesh was the year right after. It was in 2016 for that COP, and I honestly I feel like I work globally on water issues, and the Middle East, except for that kind of piercing bright white light in 2016, has been kind of dark in the global landscape, and there's been very little discussion about either mitigation or adaptation, or it's been, I would say, at a fundamentally kind of a different, almost disconnected level with other issues, and that's been really disappointing. I felt like Morocco was a good partner and lead, that they made a lot of announcements, a lot of initiatives, especially to direct linkages between the Middle East and with Africa as a whole, kind of reflecting their region and their regional perspective in those dialogues. But a lot of those ideas, I'd say, they ended up on the island of broken toys, and that's really unfortunate. And what's interesting to me now is I feel like my inbox is exploding a little bit with emails from the MENA region, from North Africa, from the Levant, and farther east, and that's a very promising sign. What are those initiatives? What are those ideas? I think one of the new pieces, what's driving some of this change is that in the regional political calculus, I think there's been a long-standing reluctance to talk about climate change generally because of the deep integration with petroleum, right? It's not just the oil-producing countries; it's also countries that receive bilateral aid or are in close allies with oil-producing countries. So that's been kind of a dampening, I think, in the region. I think second, this is an arid region, and there's been an ancient, deeply ancient, like ancient in terms of oldest human settlements level of awareness about the importance of water, the centrality of water in our lives, and I think there's almost been a kind of a sense like we have this. We know how to deal with this. I think the Syrian crisis, at least the kind of early stages of it, was a little bit of a warning shot that maybe we don't have this, and maybe actually water is not just a sector; it's a systemic driver, and it can actually unwind many parts of our societies and serve as a profoundly destabilizing element. And unfortunately, there have been lots of other really good examples across that in the region too. And I think one of the strongest elements of that is an example that I heard from just this last week. I was in Washington, D.C. I'm based on the Pacific coast of the U.S. And I was in D.C. at the U.S. Institute of Peace, and I heard some comments from one of our partners in the Levant, EcoPeace Middle East. They're a very interesting organization. They're focused on the Jordan Valley. They have 3 co-directors, Palestinian, Jordanian, and Israeli. And one of the things they said, they actually said it about 6 or 7 times in this small group meeting, to really emphasize the point, was that there's a really strong sense of shared risk that has not existed before. In a sense, this organization that's been around for a couple of decades, that's really been focused about water sharing, trying to build the kind of a technical, stakeholder-driven process for how we think about kind of shared, sustainable resource management in the region. It is becoming a water resilience organization. So the primary obstacle in the region is a 2-state solution, but and maybe 20% of Israel supports that, but 70% of Israel supports shared climate adaptation resilience initiatives. That's really powerful, and that shared fear, I think, is actually an opportunity for doing a lot of really productive, useful on the ground and policy work. And I hope can be really transformative for the region, that it can catch up quickly on that missed opportunity from COP22 in 2016.
John, you've dropped some gems that is going to completely take me off script, because now I want to ask some other questions based on what you just said. And one of the things 2 things I wanted to touch on, hopefully we can maybe have a quick discussion on, which is this idea that when it comes to water, and I would argue even outside the Middle East, this idea we got it, right? It's like, certainly in the Middle East, it's a historical, ancient issue, as you said it. And I'd argue even, not to take us off the region here, but, other parts of the US, or other parts of the world, I should say, and in the US, I think of the Colorado River Basin, and maybe not as ancient, but still this idea that we got it. And an extension of that, the sense of how water, we know the connection water has to climate, or more climate change influence has on water resources, but feels like for a long time those things were disconnected or thought of separately. And this idea of we got it, we can handle the water issue without the context of climate change, sort of led us to even more dire. I mean, the reality is what it is, but in terms of response, has caused it to be maybe not as sufficient, delayed, because a lot of from a water planning perspective, there's much opportunity to do that, but now people are forced to do it as opposed to, because now, the realization comes a little late. So, what are you guys' thoughts on that? Just sort of this disconnect leading to now that, oh, wow, this is related and folks are scrambling to actually address water as part of climate adaptation. Big question.
I'll jump in quickly and please dive in, Raha. I mean, our missing panelist Hassan, I think, is actually like really effective and powerful in this issue, and he's one, I think, of a new generation of people in the Middle East. They're young. They understand that they have a long life ahead of them, and they want to invest in the region. They want their families to be able to stay there. They want these economies to be able to prosper, and that this sense, all the points that Raha made about the growing awareness of the obstacles is really critical, and I think that what I'm hearing, in hallways, in small Zoom meetings, kind of on the sides of the stage, is really what is it that we need to do? It's a really serious discussion, and it's not a COP27 discussion. It's like COP27 is when we hit go, but we need to be developing kind of long-term plans. As a small example, I had a discussion with a technical colleague with the Arab League about 6-8 weeks ago, and one of the very simple things that he said is, because of our long-standing silence in the region, there is essentially nothing that is written in Arabic on water and climate. So, look, if we can go to a utility manager, we can go to a minister, we can go to an engineering school, and really everything they have to read is in some other language that they may not have. And it's not just Arabic that's the gap too. We're in our organization, AGWA, we're trying to move on that in particular, where we just launched with some partners, especially most notably UNESCO, an Arab language water resilience risk assessment course. It's like a remote self-paced course that lasts about 2 or 3 months. I think it started officially a week ago today, and we have the print publication that we're going to launch at COP. But these are really long-term relationships. It's about turning a big boat, and that's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of institutional changes. All those problems that Raha mentioned are big problems. They will not be solved in one meeting or in the next 5 COPs, for that matter. We're in it for the long haul, and we need to really treat it like a multi-decade problem.
Raha, do you have any perspective?
I do. I'm so glad you pulled out that thread, because this is such a wonderful topic. So it really is what you said, what you both said, of water is part of the cultural fabric. It's part of the identity. I mean, not just in the Middle East, in a lot of places in the world, but certainly in Middle East and North Africa, the MENA region. But certainly, what I think about is kind of the example of Iran. So I'm originally from Iran. And a couple of things to note there. So it's almost like this long history with water management. I will say, like, the region was quite progressive a few centuries ago, quite advanced in the things that we developed, of water management systems that we developed at the time, like the qanats in Iran being one example of that, still being used, still conceptually very relevant. But in a way, I think that's made us a little bit arrogant is the best word maybe I can come up with, but I'm sure there's a better word. It has come with this challenge of, well, we know how to do it. We figured it out. We don't really, we'll figure it out again. And I think that has challenged kind of, the management of water resources in a way that really pays attention to what's been going on, that things are not the same as they were before. And a lot of the cities have really grown in population. Our demands are very different. And, like when I look at agricultural water use in particular, which is extremely high in a lot of places in the region, but certainly very high in Iran, we still are, there's also like a cultural kind of reliance on respect, and we respect the way that we've done things before. We respect that kind of history. So, some of there's a lot of water waste when it comes to agricultural use, and part of that really is because, well, we're respecting the agricultural water use practices of the past, and it's really challenging to. It's one thing to maybe change some policies, but it's another to really implement it with, the agricultural sector, and to make sure that things are being implemented in the right way. It really is, again, going to the cultural fabric. Like the city where I was born is the third largest city. It's called Esfahan. And it used to be the capital of the Persian Empire. It's got this river that runs through it. That's is the cultural fabric of the city. Is like, if you imagine New York City with its skyscrapers, and you imagine Paris with its Eiffel Tower, those are human built things, but so is actually in this river. It's got a number of human built and beautiful bridges that cross it, and it really is the pillar of kind of how the city has been viewed, and how the economy was developed around it, how the city was developed around it. Everything was built around this river. That for the last, in the last like decade, we've seen it have sustained periods of dryness. And what I mean is, you can actually walk down the steps of the bridges and walk across this river. I mean, that is a fundamental kind of very physical manifestation of a water challenge. And the other thing that so what that really, means in reality is really significant. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting is kind of the science and technology piece. John, you were saying like the new generation wants to see things different and wants to do things a little bit differently, but there is also a challenge of access. I mean, even in a really small way, like a lot of the American journals for science journals, engineering journals are not accessible in Iran. They may be, there may be actually just a lack of access to just materials. So what was really interesting too, John, in what you said, is that the Middle East and North Africa, the region has been kind of maybe not absent, but not as present in these global dialogues, in this global water community. And that's really, it's concerning, right? So because that, like you said, it is that missed opportunity, but especially when you look at the kind of younger generation and the opportunities for science, technology, education to really help bring a lot of new, fresh perspective into the region, I'd like to think about, how do we change that? What are the barriers to what's that kind of the lack of motivation? And maybe the upcoming COPs may be a really nice opportunity for that. I would hope so. But really great. Yeah, I really like this topic that came up around culture and being a little bit like for better and for worse stuck with that.
Well, that's an excellent segue, because you leading me to my next question. We talked about COP, and certainly COP27 is at our doorstep. So let's shift from the problem to potentially the solution or solutions. And so kind of the topic I want to talk about is, if you both set the stage nicely on the challenges side as it relates to the water resources management perspective, and certainly the link or lack of link with climate change. I mean, the natural link and lack of link when we talked about the connection from a response perspective. For the MENA region specifically, and you've touched on a few of these things already, what in terms of adaptation, and because that will be a topic certainly that should dominate some of the headlines in terms of the meeting itself, because that's the perspective of Egypt pushing forward adaptation as one of the many topics that it wants to push forward for the benefit of climate vulnerable nations that experience climate change more than they contribute towards it. And so adaptation is a focus, and certainly, as we know, within adaptation, water resources is one of the key areas. With that in mind, how would you prioritize adaptation strategies or approaches for water resources management for the MENA region in particular?
I'll be the risky one and go first. The first thing I want to say is desal is not magic water. And I worry, not at COP27, but I think there's a real risk of, say, COP28 in UAE being the desal COP. And desal is it's sort of like the easy seeming choice. Desal is really there are lots of areas where desal is not going to work. You can't get a desal to the middle of Iran, right? And you're not going to get it to the Kurdish region in Iraq. But it looks like an easy solution in some places. But it also has pretty profound transaction costs. We've already modified the salinity of the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf because of the amount of desal that's already happening there. That's a very disturbing trend, and clearly we're in for a lot more desal in the region, probably even for groundwater systems. But I think it's a kind of a false promise, and I also think it's just kind of messing around with the edges of the issue. I think that the larger issue is how we think about the kind of the mainstreaming of really new, quite different approaches. So our organization AGWA, we've been working for about a year and a half with Egypt on their national climate plan, their NDC. We've just started work with Jordan, with Palestine. We're in discussions with Yemen too, actually, and you also see some more strategic planning with groups like the World Bank, for instance. In the kind of extended region, Turkey, for instance, the World Bank just published something called a CCDR, a Climate Change Development Report, last June. And used Turkey as the first example. And this is all the CCDRs. They're about 100 pages long. They have a mitigation section. So what are we doing about energy, greenhouse gases? Then there's a long adaptation section, and water is all over both of those parts. And then there's kind of a strategic intervention section at the end that says where are the main entry points. And guess what? Water is all of those. Water is every bit of it. For us, when we're engaging with our partners in places like Egypt or Palestine, what we're trying to do is to say, we have kind of immediate, really serious needs, all the things that Raha was talking about with water access, but water is also this kind of strategic connector. It's what enables all the other sectors. And we also need to get past just a kind of simple de-risking approach, which is to kind of climate proof our projects. In general, I would say I'm not a fan of the way that people approach adaptation and resilience in the US, but I will say that I am an admirer of the way that the governor of California has just started to talk about resilience. He sees this is a state in the US that is currently experiencing a 1,200-year drought, and he's planning for it to become at least 10% worse over the next 10 years. That's impressive. He said this is not about how we just manage with less. We actually need to think about a water abundance economy. We actually need to completely change the conversation from one where we're trying to minimize the bad things that are happening to saying, what does prosperity look like for our people? What does inclusion look like? What does wealth and meaningful, deep economic resilience look like for our economy, that people want to keep coming here? For the Middle East, that's about stability in our societies, about kind of expanding the sense of like a larger national mission, and it's about cooperating with your neighbors, and it's and limiting people like going to Europe or to other parts of Africa or anywhere else. You want your kids to know that if they want to stay where you grew up, that they will be able to, and that it is a good and valid and effective choice for them. And that's a completely different approach to what I really hear in any region, but it's kind of quietest of all in the Middle East. And that's the conversation I think we need to be having. Like, where are we going to find the other sources of new water? Desal is part of that, but it's not the only part. And that's the big discussion that I would like for us to be having.
Yes, a lot of great points. I'm going to go off script too, but before I do that, Raha, I'll let you, maybe if you have thoughts on the original question, and then I'm going to follow up on a few things.
Mohammed, I was not given a script. I didn't know there was a script to stick with.
The script is in my head, so is it truly a script? That's up for debate. But
yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'm a technologist at heart, of course, and I work in kind of enabling space technologies to help us look at things here on Earth and to hopefully make more informed decisions around how we manage our natural resources as one of the things that I focus on. But absolutely agree. I think technology, it is good. We have made a lot of advancements in our desalination technologies. We've made a lot of advancements in, I see you just, but in wastewater reuse for different purposes. And I don't want to minimize that, actually, that piece, but I'm with you on the desalination piece, John. That is extremely troubling. To have a system of water security that is reliant on energy use is at its core philosophically challenging and kind of goes against a lot of things that we now are realizing are to be true, right? And how we really need to manage our resources, especially our water resources. So water, and I liked what you said, John, about, the example in California. Water is, it is cultural, like we said, and it's a local, the challenges are often local and the solutions often need to be local. But, obviously it's a regional, like, it's interesting because it's kind of like transcends scales. It's both very local and it is very regional and even global. If you look at, climate systems and we look at how things kind of move in that global sense around Earth. But those conversations are really key in that there may be some cool technologies out there, and okay, let's think about how they may fit to address specific challenges that we have, right? You need to meet your needs in one way or another, but just relying on something like desalination to meet your needs is really, it's putting a Band-Aid on a dam that is bursting, or that analogy. I don't know if you all got this, the little Dutch boy that put his finger into the dam. That may have been just what I learned, to try to save the community. It's a temporary fix. And we're going to, just like when you build a seawall to keep the water from coming in to, in the Netherlands or Venice, that water is things will get, more challenging. So you're going to have to just build a bigger and bigger seawall, right? That's just an analogy. so, one, it's systems that are reliant on energy, no matter how much advancement we've made in making them more energy efficient and smart, they're still reliant on energy, and they have, things, secondary effects that are very real. Like, yeah, you mentioned, John, it can affect the water quality. You have to do something with the leftover stuff, that brine that comes from the desalination. So where does that go, right? And then the second is, it's kind of a distraction, because it's moving us away from thinking about real local, whether local, regional, land management changes that need to be made, policies that need to be implemented, and things that we can do to, manage the entire ecosystem around our water resources. Wetland health, the existence of wetlands, how does that tie into the integrity of our water resources? That's really important. So really looking at kind of an ecosystem-based approach is super key. And also looking at water use. I mean, I gave that example of the kind of like agricultural practices in Iran, and there's a lot of, water waste that comes with that. So even kind of at the individual level, right, I think it's kind of a re-education of our relationship with water. Because again, like, we have this long sustained relationship, it's ever present, because the region has faced water challenges throughout, time. But I think it's right now, it's very different. The outlook is very different, and it is kind of a re-evaluating of what's important to us, what is our relationship with water, and how do we really take an ecosystem-based approach? I'm a big fan of that. So I don't know if you mentioned at the beginning, but a lot of my work in the past was actually on hydroecology. So I used to work at the United States Forest Service, and that philosophy is really at valuing our natural ecosystems as part of the water management infrastructure, which my training as an engineer, as a civil engineer, and early on in my career, it's kind of like they don't agree. That's changed. I think our education systems are changing too, but it really doesn't agree. And I will say, and I'm glad now I kind of led to the education piece. Another part of it is looking at engineering degrees, how we're teaching water management especially in universities in the MENA region. Because I have, and I can just, speak to a couple of examples that I know of, because I've, either experienced it myself or work directly with people at those universities, that it just this sort of adaptive way of thinking that, like, Agua and John's been, really like helping the world see and push forward. It's just not really captured in those textbooks. It's not captured in our coursework. It's, so you got to also kind of look at the root of everything. Like, you look at the youth, looking at all these different pieces. I think that cultural kind of like reassessment and of our relationship with water, it needs to be part of every aspect of of our worlds, of our communities. And looking at the kind of community solutions, because if you were to, and this is like the beautiful thing, when you actually spend time with communities, you start to see there are really smart solutions that people have come up with to adapt their local needs, whether it's a farmer, whether it's somebody living in a city that has to manage water because of their store getting flooded. It's one way or another, like, it's paying attention to these local solutions and thinking of ways to scale them up. But yeah, totally. I mean, I think that the California example again is good because it's both like kind of that local, let's think about what this means locally for us, but also we're part of this bigger water system, and so we're going to have to work with our neighbors. And I mean, the positive thing is the Middle East has there's been a lot of cooperation. Maybe I'll just speak to the Middle East, then more cooperation around water than challenges historically, let's say. So it's kind of also like looking at the opportunity space and the assets that we already have, and trying to build out on those, but totally agree. Sorry, I don't mean to go off on a tangent. Just last thing I do want to mention, the wastewater reuse piece too. Again, I don't like just having a reliance on technology, but I think that's one where we've seen really positive examples in Israel. We've seen, and if we're looking only in the region, but outside as well, the county, Orange County in California, in Southern California, being the first place to sell this concept of reusing their wastewater for drinking purposes as well. And I remember being in school at that time when those discussions were being had, and we never thought it would really happen, but it did. It took a lot of kind of discussion, dialogue with community members to realize, to get them to really understand, the challenges, the risks, and what was being done to their water to make it beautiful and useful again. So, you really don't want to minimize that piece of water reuse.
You guys give me so much, like there's so many threads here. I don't even, so many good threads I could go. Maybe I'll start with a comment just in response to a couple of things, and then move our discussion to another, or dive down in a couple of the pieces. I totally agree, and the example you brought on California, not to take us out of the MENA region again, and I sort of provide the parallel example of Arizona, where for the longest, climate change was not really recognized as an issue in general, let alone with water resources planning until recently, and begrudgingly, when the drought has amplified to a point to do so. And unfortunate consequences relate to the cultural sort of impact and value of water. Native American tribes that have had their water rights still in limbo in terms of access to water, and those that have had to fight hard to get it. And so there's these issues certainly exist. And to your guys' point on, the status quo is changing in response. It should have been changing. And what I mean by that, as fast as a crisis has been accelerating, status quo in terms of education, management systems, response. Some let's say nations or sectors are more responsive than others in terms of recognizing it's literally adapt or be left behind. So that's changing, but once again, still not sufficient. Let me ask a very specific question, which is a difficult question, but was sort of came, at the top of this topic, of this particular earlier questions discussion. If desal is problematic, and you've laid all the reasons why it is so in the long term, for a region that has very limited natural water supply, certainly some countries more than others, depending for access to surface water systems or not, what do we do if not desal? What's the solution? And you've touched on a few things, so maybe just expand I know you've talked about water reuse, etc. But
yeah. No, I love that question. So that it's once we get kind of harvest the desal beast, put it in its place. What are other options? And this is actually where I start to get excited, because I feel like there are really important ideas that we can pull from around the world. A lot of these are South-South ideas, and one of my favorite is actually that when you talk in any part of the Middle East about climate change, what people always want to talk about first, of course, is water scarcity, increasing water scarcity and water access. How do we make sure that we're getting, not just getting water from a truck, basically, but if you talk for another 15 minutes, then they also start to say other interesting things too. And one of the things that they like to that often comes up, I would say essentially invariably comes up, is the issue of flooding. And this is part of a more general global trend. Like 5-10 years ago, the sort of rule of thumb was that dry places were getting drier and the wet places were getting wetter, and that's not the way things have played out. What the way things have played out. So I'm a resilient scientist. I'm the eco-hydrologist hydrologist to the hydroecologist of Raha. What we see is that the dry places are getting drier and wetter, and the wet places are getting wetter and drier. It's actually often kind of an accentuation of seasonality and an expansion of at both extremes for extreme events, even while the mean is changing too. So let's take a place like Amman. Amman is arguably one of the very most water stressed places on the planet. It has an aquifer. Much of its water is groundwater. It's a transboundary aquifer. We've known for at least with quite systematic studies for 10, 15 years, some work that the German government funded, that aquifer is essentially in collapse and very rapidly from over extraction. But if you look at the surface, you also have these rain bombs that are happening. You have extreme flooding events that are happening in the city. And in China, there's a movement that started also about around 10 years ago, around 2012. It's called the Sponge Cities movement. It's become a national program. The Asian Development Bank has been really instrumental in developing it. And what that does is it carves out exactly the way Raha was talking about, kind of an ecosystem in the middle of the city. In Isfahan, for instance, it's a city that for millennia has faced the river, and this is an idea of like actually trying to place rivers and wetlands kind of back in the center of cities, and create kind of safe places for flooding. That also often enhance other kinds of livelihoods, even kind of increase other types of investment as a secondary level. But maybe the most important issue that's happening from that is when the water sits there during a flood event, is it infiltrates. It actually goes back into the aquifer. And so, this is an example of the kind of advanced thinking that I think our ancestors knew about centuries ago, but that maybe we've really forgotten, that actually droughts and floods are two sides of the same coin. If we can capture and hold the flood waters, then we can actually make the droughts easier to cope with. And the kind of first response, sort of beginners, knee-jerk response with a lot of issues, especially mountainous areas, is we need to build a big storage dam. But that's not really going to work in many places, many contexts. The Jordan River is a great example. The Nile is a spectacular example. Whereas aquifers, they are the grayest of all possible nature-based solutions. They are we're taking the living rock and converting it into a massive storage dam that we can either put water in, like inject it in, let it infiltrate passively. It often comes out much cleaner than when it went in. And that we are walking on literally on the surface of our new storage mechanisms, and that's an interesting mixture of sort of ancient insight and new technology that we really need to be able to make good use of. And that's something that it can happen, very far from coast. It should be something that we're really trying to amplify. And not to, I promise that I'm not being paid by Gavin Newsom in California. But one of the things I really like about what California's done, they released a water scarcity plan in early August, and they plan to actually increase almost by an order of magnitude the amount of water storage that they have in California, which is already one of the highest per capita in the world. But it's all by using aquifer infiltration systems. So they're not building anything on the surface. It's all about capturing flood waters, the kind of increasing flood frequency and flood intensity, and then kind of expanding that as the new underground dam. It's actually quite an elegant and poetic even approach.
Yeah. Nature's reservoir, right? The aquifers.
Exactly.
Rahat, do you offer, this idea of, let's go back to what worked, low tech but effective, or I know you operate in the high tech world, but in terms of, alternatives to desal, and I know you touched on a few of them earlier.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I'll put it this way. There is no piece of technology that I think we have come up with as humans, or that we will probably come up with anytime soon, that will be more advanced than what nature can do. I mean, frankly, we may put a nice, like some fancy bows on it and call it an advancement, but really the way that our natural environment manages resources is really smart. It's super advanced. And all that we have done throughout time is to, in some ways, mimic that with our built infrastructure and with our systems, right? Desalination, you take the water, you force the particles to separate, simple way. And then you get fresh water separated out from the brine. Well, nature already does that. And John, talked about one example of that. And so I would say, yes, we've, advancement is great, and we should continue to innovate, but we should be paying attention to nature and not moving so far past it, because we've learned that has not worked. And I mean, recent history, right, within our lifetimes, that's has shown us that that's not a complete solution. So I think this adaptive way of thinking about the entire ecosystem around your water resources is super important, because absolutely, it's not, the arid regions don't just face water scarcity and drought. They face floods, absolutely, and it causes havoc, and it's extremely disruptive. It's a multi-hazard kind of approach that we really need to be looking at. And I think, of course, John, everything you said was tugging at my heartstrings of this poetic way of building our cities out. And actually what's, one other thing, maybe it seems like shouldn't say I'm being paid by the city of Isfahan, but I mean, just to say that city was actually built out with nature-based solutions in mind in the 17th century. So the entire city was built to have these gardens. It's actually like, the street where I lived, it was the upper garden street, like Charbagh, voila. And so it was like, and all these kind of gardens were built around the river. And I think that was a very advanced way of thinking about urban planning at that time. But yeah, absolutely. I think that's it's harder to think in that way, and it's harder to implement solutions in that way because timescales are different. And maybe your return on the way that we think about the return on investment is different. And John can speak to this much better than I can on kind of the economic piece of it and the valuation piece of natural solutions. But I think that is challenging at times to really implement those solutions, maybe partly because of the finance piece. And then I will just make one last point, kind of going back to the education. A lot of times the people that we see in the ministries of environments and kind of in decision-making places for our environment, natural resources, let's say generally in the region, they do tend to have engineering degrees. They tend to have some kind of a technical background. And how wonderful it would be to have people that are trained in multiple ways. So they're trained to think about ecology. They're trained to think about, nature-based solutions as one of the tools that can be used. And, if they can go out and actually spend time doing field work in watersheds and basins, I think that is really important in helping us understand fundamentally kind of what the challenges are, and then how we can come up with solutions that are not just built, right? They are mixed.
Yeah. Yeah, we could talk about this for hours. But because we're getting close to our time. Let me ask a final question before we move on to sort of your last thoughts and takeaways before we conclude. And this came up earlier, and you kind of touched on it, Raha, a little bit in your last set of comments, which is the issue of scale. A lot of what we talked about is sort of in this larger scale, top down, right? Large scale, this issue of desal, large scale storage. But as we all know, adaptation can occur on multiple levels and scales, not necessarily on a governance scale that, at least in the Middle East, can tend to push these large scale projects. But what are some ways where we could implement or mobilize adaptation for water resources at smaller scales, things like at the municipality level, community level, et cetera. And you guys had sprinkled some ideas about, or begun to scratch that surface. So I just kind of want to touch on that since it has come up earlier.
So that I would maybe to use kind of a like a programming metaphor, I might divide it between software and hardware. So I think that the most important part is the software. That's maybe even to kind of build on some of the ideas that Raha was just mentioning. I'd say the most important piece of technology remains the human brain. And actually like how we see and interpret the world effectively, how we even define problems. And I think climate change, it's really easy to say, look at 3 points in the past and say the fourth one is going to look like the previous three, or it's going to be a line, and it's not. That one of the most important issues is that we, like Pakistan's floods, so intense. They had a really catastrophic flood about 10-12 years ago that was immediately followed by a catastrophic drought. And they didn't at most they tried to prepare for the last flood, and their worst mistake that they're likely, unfortunately, again to make now is to prepare for this flood instead of the next one, which is going to be even worse. So you need to actually think for how we move forward. That this is not a data problem. This is actually the way that we define problems in the first place. And in that sense, you need to have people that are working really across sectors. You need to have people that are in water supply and sanitation issues, that are talking with energy, that are talking with agriculture, that are talking with the ecosystem people. And that doesn't happen at the end of a project. It doesn't happen in a project. It happens at the program level. It happens really at the in how whole programs come together, and making sure that you have multiple specialties that are blending insights from economics to law and governance to eco-hydrology. And they are technical issues, and they come down. They have to be expressed often through engineering, but it's not just an engineering solution. And if you treat it that way, you will fail, and you will fail catastrophically. Agreed. So I think that's the software side. The hardware side is that we need to really diversify our solution space too. And our solution space is not just concrete and rebar. Our solution space is not just a super advanced Western technology for water reuse and recycling. Our solution space it's going to include that. It's going to include desal, but it's got to include the way that we govern and manage water, the way we price water. It's also going to be the way that we blend dynamic ecosystems into our communities. So I think we need to open up the problem definition space at the same time that we open up the solution space. It's a quick answer. It's not maybe the specificity that you were looking for, Mohammed, but that's what I'm going with.
No, that's good. I tend to be more engineering, so this is it's good you push back against me, because I think that is more far-reaching than kind of where I want to go. Raha, your idea on this issue of scale and global versus local solutions.
Well, I'm just going to take it really, really local from everything that John said, because I agree. And with one thing, accountability. I think holding each other accountable within a community is both a beautiful thing, and it's kind of part of how our communities are actually grow and exist and function well. And I really do believe in the power of the individual in being part of the solution. Not that we put it all on the individual users and individuals of the community, but that there's this collaboration between all the skills that John just mentioned and the local community. So really it will require, it's a philosophical shift in the way that we think about our water resources and how we manage them, and that we are all, I love this term that is used in the United States and maybe used elsewhere, but water stewards, that we're stewards of the land. I'd never, until I started working for a land management agency, I hadn't really felt that. You feel it in the United States. There's this like sense of stewardship of the land and the resources that, a lot of people tend to feel. And it's really important. I think we have this sentiment in a lot of places in the world, but, unfortunately, as we have built, we kind of like separate ourselves out from that stewardship role. And we almost take the responsibility away from us and say, well, the state's got it, or the city's got it. They've figured it out. And you kind of put it out of your mind, but, bringing it back to our responsibility and like holding that like community accountability, I think is really important, and can, again, be kind of like that super ultra community, small scale fit with everything else that was said.
Well said. All right, we are essentially out of time, but I'll ask you both, and maybe I'll start with you, Raha, just sort of your final thoughts, takeaways, messages, on this topic as we look towards, COP27 and ahead. What are some final thoughts or takeaways you want to share?
I would love to see more ideas. I would love to see the MENA region come up with really great concepts, ideas for the future and how we manage water challenges. And, really that intergenerational aspect is super important, and that the cultural aspect is really important. Adaptation, especially when it comes to water resources, it is deeply cultural. It's deeply, community focused. And there are very few one size fits all solutions. I would really love to see, the innovation, not just coming from, like some of the technology perspectives, but in other ways, looking at this vast history, rich history of innovation that we have in managing our water resources. I would, really want to see that kind of Arab, Middle East, North Africa touch, that identity of water management really take hold and advance our goals. There is an opportunity for the region. Yes, we have 2 COPs coming up. We have the world, what is it? The World Cup. Is the World Cup? Yeah.
Yes, the World Cup is happening.
So we have all these things, right? Like, so there is a tension on the region, right? In now, and that's great. So let's, I want the region to be innovators, to be leaders in the field, and so let's do it. Let's show what we can really do.
Yeah, great. John, your final thoughts?
Stop doom scrolling. And this is something that actually the region can own again, and can actually become a knowledge and expertise center that the rest of the world can learn from as well. That's probably the most important message I have. Don't just think about this as a small problem. We need to make sure that our solutions are commensurate with the size of the challenges that we're really facing. I think that lack of imagination, that sort of lack of ambition in terms of being able to say, let's really think big about this. Let's not treat this as a technical solution. We need to find those small stories that Raha was mentioning of success and innovation, maybe ancient innovation even, and we need to blow them up. At the same time, we need to be looking around and find out where the things are. And this is going to require a deep investment, not just in a financial sense, but in the way that institutions, the way that universities, schools are treating this as a problem. I think, I'm sorry that Hassan is not on this call, but the reason I admire Hassan as a person is he is restless and hungry for new ideas, and he is personally trying to mobilize a big range of resources to be able to enable transformation. I was amazed to when I got an email from Yemen, like asking if we could help on water resilience for them. My first response was, "Are you sure that's the problem you want to be worrying about right now? You've got a lot of other stuff on your plate," but that's what they want to talk about. And that's really powerful, that they know that they need to think about the long term as well as today and tomorrow.
Fantastic. Excellent, excellent final thoughts for us to dwell a little bit further on. I want to thank you both so very much for participating in this panel, providing your expert voice and opinion. I think our audience, I myself included, has appreciated that. Before we conclude, just want to do couple of final plugs. Top of this hour, we'll have our second panel of the day, which will be on climate financing, as I had mentioned in the beginning. And then for those that are still interested in our COP27 thematic events, I will also plug on Wednesday. We are also hosting a panel on climate progress in the energy sector. So you're getting a little bit of everything this week: adaptation, financing, and energy. So all very sort of important prongs for the COP discussion. With that, thanks to our audience for tuning in. Thank you to our panelists again. And we'll see you.